First is the APICS conference in New Orleans. Please visit the APICS 2014 conference website for more details. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our presenter, Tony Zampello.
Thank you, Tawana. I hope everybody's having a good day, at least here in Rhode Island. I don't know where you're all from. It's nice and bright and sunny and almost like the summer again. So let me get up the PowerPoint, and here we go. Just a real quick introduction once I get some of these things out of the way. I have been in manufacturing for over 30 years, working on your side of the fence for most of you. And then since then, I've been doing basically consulting and educating and training for 10 years on my own. I have the basic APICS certifications of CPIM, CIRM, and CSCP, all of which are lifetime certifications. And I am a Master Instructor at APICS for CPIM, CSCP, and a Lead Instructor in Principles and Operations Management. As Tawana said, anytime during the presentation that you have a question, just type it in and she will monitor those, and if the timing is right, she will just interrupt me and ask the question, and we'll try and answer it then, or we'll let you know that we'll answer it later on. But don't be afraid to type them in as you see that particular slide that makes you want to ask a question. So what we're going to do today is go over the definition of sales and operations planning, a quick process overview, what are some of the attributes and objectives of S&OP, the implementation challenges, of which there are many and a few really big ones. We'll talk about the foundational components for successful S&OP, and then deeper into the benefits. So when we talk about a definition, what is sales and operations planning? Now, typically, I'm not going to stand here and read every single word off every single slide to you, because I know you can do that on your own. But this one's important because this is an actual APICS definition that comes right from our latest dictionary, the 14th edition. And it says that S&OP is a process to develop tactical plans that provide management the ability to strategically direct its businesses to achieve competitive advantage on a continuous basis by integrating customer-focused marketing plans for new and existing products with the management of the supply chain. The process brings together all the plans for the business: sales, marketing, development, manufacturing, sourcing, financial, human resources, and the list goes on, into one integrated set of plans. So what we come up with as an output of the process is one single company game plan that everybody is working to, instead of each department having its own plan and its own idea of what is best for the company. First and foremost, S&OP is a balancing act. We have demand on one side and we have supply on the other. Now, this particular slide makes it look like they have to be equally balanced. But the first thing a company has to do is to define what they mean by balanced. One of the policies of the company has to address the fact of whether they want to have more demand than they have supply and therefore chase that demand, or the opposite, where they have the supply and they are there ready and raring to go every time they get an order and the demand comes in. Demand itself is basically infinite. There's as much demand out there as you can get, and it's based on actual orders, which is the best kind of demand. That's the bird in the hand, and demand forecasts. Now, the only reason we need a forecast is when we have to plan anything: materials, operations, people, labor, resources, beyond the time period that we can see for actual orders. Most businesses fall into this category. There are very, very few out there that can work just with actual orders. On the supply side then, we have our supply orders, our purchase orders, and our work orders basically, that say this is how we are going to get our product into place to be able to ship to satisfy demand. We also have our resources and capacity lined up so that we can make sure that when we get those orders, we have the capability to take care of it. At the S&OP level, resources can be anything. It is not just those work centers or machines within your operation that are bottlenecks or close to it. It could also be a very strategic, costly, long lead time material that you need advance notice on, that you need to act on. It could be a very high level of labor that you need to do a long search, and there's a huge training curve to get the people into the right level to be able to service your company. In New England, we're kind of spoiled because most of our factories have plenty of parking and lots of parking lots, but I've been to companies where parking is sometimes listed as a key resource because they realize that if they went and increased the output of the factory, they wouldn't have any place for people to park their cars. So they have to know well in advance, how do we resolve that issue? So it can be any resource whatsoever that you need to know a long time in advance so that you can prepare yourselves and consider all the alternatives and not just have a knee-jerk reaction because it's right around the corner. The final piece of supply that we use so that we can balance our supply against our demand is that of inventory. Inventory can be kept at all levels. If we are a make-to-stock kind of company, we are probably going to keep that at the finished good level. Just be aware that that is the most expensive place to hold inventory, at finished goods. The least expensive place in your bill of material is the raw material that you purchase, because there you just have the material cost and you have not added any labor and overhead to it. In between, you have your work in process, where you take those raw materials, you work them to a certain point from which you can fill lots of different customer orders to their requirements, and you keep a level of inventory there. That's also known as an assemble to order or finish to order or postponement kind of environment, and is the hybrid between the two. As we look at the full level of activities, if you look in the middle at the very top, it says business plan. So every company has a business plan and a strategy that says this is who we are, this is who we want to continue to be, here are our core competencies, here's what makes us successful. This is where we're going to compete, which customers we're going to use or to supply, excuse me, and how we're going to carry that all out. That is generally done with a very long horizon, looking out 3-5 years depending on your business, and is at a very high level, usually just in the currency of the company, dollars, euros, what have you. So it's not something that you can just take and give to operations and say, here, do this. They need a little more detail than that. S&OP takes that business plan and says, we need to translate that. We need to put that into the language that our operations and sales part of our companies can understand. Typically, S&OP handles the volume, and we'll talk a little bit later, it's done at the family level where we aggregate our products into various families. At that level, we come up with a sales and marketing plan, which is on the demand side, and we come up with an operations plan, which is our supply. Now, as we go down this chart, every time we take a step down, we get into a higher level of detail, but our horizon shrinks and we come in closer to today. S&OP, some typical rules of thumb, it's an 18-month rolling horizon, so that every month goes by, a new one is added on, and most typical companies use the 18 months. You can get away with less, sometimes you may need more. So you have to consider that when you start to develop it. Your forecasting at this point is by family usually, and we're talking about the market, not about the products or the customers so much, but about the market that we serve, so that we can look at our forecast not just from where we've been and where we're going with the current products we have and the new ones we're thinking of, but also with what direction will the market take and how can we best fill that. On the resource side in S&OP, we are going to be looking at anything that takes a long time to get and is basically very expensive. One way to think of it is, if we have to go all the way to the top to get the approval to spend the money to increase this resource or get the approval to decrease this resource, we need a lot of time to put our case together and a lot of levels to go through. So that's probably a resource that you're going to want to handle at the S&OP level. Once you've got that in place, and you'll notice that the arrows on the side from the S&OP block there go to the forecasting side and the resource planning side, those arrows go back and forth. So we put together an operations plan and a sales plan based on the forecast, but then we bounce it off reality and we decide, do we have the resources for it? We validate whether or not we will be able to accomplish it. If the answer is no, we have to go back and look at, well, what are the rules we are working under and how can we work with those to make it work? Or do we need to break those rules, set new rules? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? Once we've got that all straightened out and validated, we will finally come out with an operations plan that we can do, that makes sense, that is actionable. The sales plan is the last thing in the world that we want to change because we've put a lot of time and effort into it. And yes, I know every forecast is wrong. And it's a matter of how wrong it is, but we've got to decide on, well, are we going to use that level of forecast? And when we say yes, then we've got to try and do everything we can to make that work, to make that demand plan work for the company. So where we play is in the operations side, and we change our production plans, get more resources, reduce our resources, move our resources around, whatever it might take. Once that's all validated, then we can move it down into master scheduling, which is where we get to the product mix. We do some more planning there, some more forecasting, some more resource planning, but we start to get into a closer horizon and in greater detail, and now we're actually talking about products and customers. And for today's presentation, we're just going to stop right there, and we're not even going to get that far down. I just want you to see the link and what happens with S&OP after you produce it. As we look at the processes involved, we have our demand management. So that is going to connect to S&OP. Demand management includes naturally the forecast that you're going to come up with, and it also says, well, what are the products? What's the brand plan? What are we going to do to sell ourselves on the market? How do we make sure that this is where we want to go as a company? These are the products. These are the brands. I worked for one company once, and brand was very, very important to them. And one of the things that they enforced upon all their different manufacturing facilities is that when you sell your product to your customer, it will never show up in an end case that's marked down for clearance. If anything, the company would buy it back, but they did not want it to cheapen the brand by having it out there and having it discounted. And then we were actually not even allowed to resell it in the United States at a lower price. We had to actually go offshore if we needed to sell inventory to dispose of it. That kept the brand name up there, and so when people thought of that brand, they thought of quality, they thought of luxury, and they knew they weren't going to get it at a discounted price, so price wasn't the issue. It became all about the product and the brand. In demand management, you have to have a marketing plan. How are we going to make it work? And then a sales plan. And how do we get it out there? How do we price it? You know, the 4 P's of marketing and sales all have to be taken care of. On the supply side, we have good old production. That's the thing we cannot do without. Whether we do it ourselves or whether we outsource it and offshore it, doesn't matter. We still have to get a product produced somewhere. It will take resources. There are facilities, there's labor, there's machines that have to be accounted for. There will be inventory. That's one of the resources that we can use to help us satisfy the demand that's out there. Using it well, it can be a very valuable weapon. The more you talk about the full supply chain these days, we talk about our customers and our suppliers getting together with us to talk about total inventory in the chain, not just at any one of our locations. So it becomes an investment with a lot of thought going into it to see what's best for the entire supply chain. And that then ties right into the fact that distribution is also part of that supply chain. One of the things we will always talk about as we talk about supply chain is velocity. So when we get into that distribution part, we want to make sure it really makes sense as to where we put those distribution points, how we move our product around, so that velocity is at the top of our minds, always wanting to satisfy the customer and delight the customer beyond their expectations. As we go into the attributes of sales and operations planning, it connects the business plan to tactical planning. It takes that nebulous plan that's out there that is above us all, that we don't see, that we don't necessarily understand. We may have a general view of it, but S&OP says, well, we've got to turn that into something that is actionable, that we can handle as a company. It will balance the supply and demand, usually at the product family level, but again, the company has to decide, what does balancing supply and demand really mean for us? It plans at the volume level using aggregate time buckets, not the individual end product mix level, which is done down at the master scheduling level. please keep in mind that everything we go about today is the general practice of S&OP working in most cases. It is a template, it is proven, and it has done well. But as you start to look at your own individual company, make sure you get started with this, you understand this, but then don't be afraid to say, okay, we need to tweak this for our own company. But typically, this is what we do. We plan at a volume level, have those aggregate buckets, and we talk about families or groups of products, which again are based on the market. S&OP enables a better understanding of the customer and market opportunities and company capabilities. Now that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, and I probably am. The market is there first, but then we definitely have some major customers that are actually defining that market. So we have to know who they are. One of the benefits that S&OP can help us with is getting a better relationship with our customers, with our top customers. So this is where S&OP can help us understand the customer, have conversations with them on a consistent basis, and move forward so that what we're doing aligns with the vision and needs of that particular customer. We are also looking hard at the company's capabilities. We may have machines in place that were put there years ago that, based on what we knew then, was the right thing to do. We put in these big, huge machines that we ran lot sizes of 100,000, and that was the best thing in the world to do with the knowledge we had and the business we had. As we look at S&OP and we keep looking at it each month, and we have a rolling 18 months, we may see that, gee, that market is changing. Maybe we need a few smaller machines and not that one big one. Maybe there are machines that and work centers that we no longer need, that were very important at one time, but now our business is changing. So we have to look hard at our company capabilities. A major attribute of S&OP is getting sales, marketing, manufacturing, finance, logistics, HR, engineering, from a new product point of view, all those different departments together. Maintenance. And you've heard me say HR a couple times, and you may ask, why in the world does HR care about what's going on 18 months from now, 6 months from now, and what would they have to do with S&OP? Well, for one thing, they get to see what's coming, and then they can start to make some more educated decisions and consider different alternatives when they see which direction the company is going in. Instead of that good old, and I've been in these shoes many times, where on Wednesday we take our trip down to the HR department, tell them how lovely everything looks and what nice pictures they have on the wall, and oh, by the way, you know, we don't really need as many people as we have starting Monday. That is one situation. The other one says, oh, by the way, we need twice as many people as we have now, starting Monday. So this way, we start to get departments like HR involved way ahead of time. The next one is that it is demand-driven. So we are starting to see, through S&OP, what's the demand, and then what's that strategy that we're going to use to satisfy that demand back up at that business level. The executives that run the company are heavily involved in S&OP. Done properly, this is how they run the company, and they don't need to get involved in every little fire and decision and fire drill that we come up with all month long. We can work this out at our S&OP sessions. So what are the objectives? we want to support that business plan. We have to measure against it. We have to make sure that our S&OP process produces something that is in line with that business plan. It helps us ensure that the strategic plans that were up there in the business planning process are realistic before we pass it down to our master scheduling arm of the company, because once we start to get down there, lots of wheels start turning, lots of things start to happen, and it's very hard once they're moving to stop them and turn them in another direction. It helps the organization effectively manage our changes to the plan so that we can look at various alternatives, not just here's the quick answer, got to do it, don't have time to talk about it, let's go get it done. It's a good, effective management of our finished good inventory in a make-to-stock kind of environment, our order backlog if we are a make-to-order or assemble-to-order kind of environment. It gives us performance measures to identify when our actual is different than the plan. Part of our S&OP process is to look backwards for a brief time just to see where it was wrong and try to figure out the root cause, but then immediately go forward and begin working with how we make this better and what do we need to change to go forward. The biggest objective, it kind of sums it all up, is that it enables the organization to be focused, aligned, and engaged. Before a company formally puts in S&OP, they say, oh yeah, this is a new process we're going to start. Well, actually, every company is already doing all the facets of S&OP, except they may not be meeting together in a formal basis, especially with the executive team, but they're doing all the work. S&OP is a way of aligning it all together, focusing it, and getting people to understand what that business is all about. Back in 2011, APICS did a study, and they were looking at the practices and challenges of S&OP. 46% of the companies said they have overcome the challenges and are seeing significant results. 36 are stalled and are proceeding very slowly, and then it goes all the way down to a couple percent. They have no plans at that time to implement S&OP. This just helps give you an understanding of where you might be. If you look at yourself and you see your company, you can look at which bar your company shows up on, and that can help you understand where should you go next, what should you do. The challenges. The biggest one is the lack of strategic coordination among departments. Every department is trying to do the best it can. It's very, very hard to find that person that comes in or that department that says, hey, we're going to find out what can we do today to really mess up this company. That just doesn't happen. Everybody's trying to do the best they can do. The problem is if they're not aligned and focused, that may actually be a detriment to what another department is trying to do. So that lack of strategic coordination, and that is coupled with the fact that there's insufficient interaction among the groups. They're each so busy looking at their own small piece of the pie that they don't get to see the other pieces and don't have time to talk. Which leads right into the third one, that common vision, which usually means that comes from a lack of commitment from top management. Very rarely does it ever come to the point where the implementation is the data. There's lots of data out there. We may need some training. We may need some more skills in data analysis that we don't have, and we may have to learn how to communicate better. But most of what the implementation challenge is all about is about getting people aligned. People as an ingredient is the most important ingredient of any implementation, and more so in S&OP than anything else that you might undertake. As we look at the foundations, we look at S&OP being at the top, and you see right here we have a tiered planning horizon, sub-processes, leadership, analytics, performance, grids and graphs. We'll briefly touch on each one of those. But that's all sitting on change management. We are going to change the approach people take to getting things done and making our company successful. So we need to make sure that we understand what people are going to go through and how we move forward. And underlying all of that, we need a foundation of continuous improvement, because without that, the project will eventually stall out and go nowhere and may even go backward. When we talk about tiered planning horizon, you've got strategic, tactical, operational. Strategic, long range, that's up at that business planning level, and S&OP is really the tie between the strategic and the tactical. And then when we get into the master schedule is when we get down into the operational. The benefits of looking at that include the linkage, the coordination, and then the ease of consensus building. When we start to look at, well, what are the corporate goals, demand objectives, and supply objectives to make sure they're all aligned together. We need to step away in S&OP from day-to-day management and look at the big long-term picture. As we look at the integrated sub-processes, again, this is going to sound a little bit repetitious. We have that corporate plan over the top of everything, and that's supported by a demand plan and a supply plan. We have to then work into inventory, marketing, sales, production, resource. You can see what we have here. Those are all the things that have to come together, and they all make up what is called the S&OP process. S&OP is not a software package that you just buy and implement and then go on. It is not an IT project. It is a process. There may be some IT help that you can use. There may be a package that might help you do something like forecasting or data analysis. Those are great. You got to find the one that works for you. But typically you don't need anything new to get started and to move forward. We mentioned that people are a very important part of S&OP, implementation and ongoing. So we need leadership accountability. We need an executive team that are going to make the decisions on all the critical issues in spending for production, for sales, that make sure the financial plan and the business performance all tie in together. An executive sponsor is the one who sets the top management expectations. That's the person who gets those necessary resources and helps us clear the obstacles that we have to get by. The S&OP process owner, which is becoming more and more a full-time position in companies that want to stay on top and continuously improve the process, is the person who leads the monthly meetings right from the very beginning in the first step of gathering the data. They're the person that stays in tune with every department to make sure that they're all connected, that they're all talking, that everything is working as planned. A critical piece of an S&OP process is having a calendar that's established well in advance that defines each month when each of the steps has to be completed and moved on to the next. There's a demand planning team taking care of demand. There's a supply planning team. The S&OP process owner is involved in each of these teams. And then the pre-S&OP team, that's where a lot of the grunt work is done. Some people call it the heavy lifting. So for instance, if we had 12 families, what pre-S&OP team may come out with is the fact that, well, 9 of these families we can work out perfectly fine with all the rules we were given, the policies we have a plan. Families 10 and 11, okay, we've got a few issues there, we have some alternatives. We're going to go to leadership and say, okay, we can go this way, we can go that way. We'll leave it up to you guys. We'll discuss the pros and cons. And then there's family 12. And the pre-S&OP team says, this is the one that we need the executive team to spend the time at the meeting. That pre-S&OP team with their pre-S&OP meeting are the ones that identify the issues and set the agenda for the executive S&OP meeting. Leadership accountability will answer that question. Who are the owners? Because without the effective process and government, you're not going to have a successful S&OP process in place and continuing to run. We mentioned that you need to do some data gathering, so you're going to need some deep analytics. One of the best things that helps an S&OP project getting together is that person or team of people that you have hidden away that can do wonders with all the data that are in your system, no matter what kind of system it is, and turn it into the information you need. You can set up a data dictionary so that you know that when you say sales, here's where it came from. This is the field in our system that generated that information. They will do what needs to be done so that we never, ever, at any of our meetings, demand planning, supply planning, pre-S&OP, executive S&OP, sit there and argue about, that's not the right sales number, that's not the right production number. That is taken off the table by having a very good process to do the analytics that you need. These analytics will also be a huge tool in helping you forecast the future, because you're going to have to make some basic assumptions on the past to apply to the future and then test them every month. The fifth area we look at is the performance metrics. These drive the accountability and the ownership. If we don't measure it, we won't know how we're doing, and eventually it just becomes another chore and gets put off to the side. So the performance measurements will help make this process the disciplined, factual-based process that we need so that our executives don't even think twice about the data we gave them or the information that we turned in based on that data and the conclusions that we came up with. So they know that, okay, everything's in place. Now we just need to consider, how do we handle it? What do we do with that? You can look at the performance measures as a tier 1, which is a forecast variance, a cost of goods sold kind of thing. Tier 2, you start to get deeper into, well, what's it cost to carry inventory? What is our resource utilization? What should it be? Tier 3, we start to get into, gee, what are the fill rates with our customers? Does it cost us obsolescence? How much inventory do we really have out there? Different things like that. One of the keys with any metrics, keep them to as few as possible, keep them as simple as possible, and don't measure something that you don't give people the authority and the power to have an effect on when it's not hitting the goal that you need. As we look at the different grids and graphs, this is a typical S&OP format. Again, each company can do something a little different, but you'll see it starts, and there would be one of these for each family. And at the top you see sales. We have a forecast, and for the first few periods, in this case there were 4, here's what we thought it was going to be, here's what it actually was, and then we have a difference. And we also have a cumulative difference, so that we see that was it just timing or was our whole forecast off. That helps us understand going forward how much we can trust this forecast. Is there a bias in a certain direction? We then have a production, we do the same thing, and the calculation of the finished goods inventory. I typically get in heavy discussions with some of my customers when we talk about planning inventory. And I say, well, you really don't plan inventory. You project your sales, you plan your production, and the difference between the two becomes your inventory. And if that's not what you want, if that's not what you liked, well then you got to go back and change your production. Because if you're going to believe in your sales plan, there's not much to change there, if anything, so it's all about production. So we have to look hard at that and find ways to execute that sales plan, and that production plan is going to be based on meeting sales and trying to come out with the correct calculation of where we want to be in inventory. In this case, it says finished goods. This is typically a make-to-stock kind of company. Very handy, especially as we get higher up in the food chain when we talk about executives, are graphs. Graphs tell us a bigger story all in one shot. The good old, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it helps us understand where we're going by looking very quickly. The next thing we talked about was change management, because we said this is going to be mostly about getting people to do things differently. So we have to look hard at what does it take, what do we have to know, what drives our people to change what they're doing. We have to look at the acceptance towards the ownership and restructuring of any roles and responsibilities as we formalize S&OP. There are going to be some people that were very powerful before, at least in their own minds, because they had the data, they had the information, and you had to come to them to get it. Now, those people are going to have to share it very early in the process, and everybody's going to know what's going on. That's a major change to the way they work and to their perception of themselves in the company. So you want to make sure that you understand how to work with these people, how to train those people around the appropriate changes that you're going to make. In the end, you're trying to win the support of your employees, and by being persuasive and being appropriate with the adjustments that we are making to the way things are done. Communication is the key word here. The last part about the basics is the fact that we have to make sure that there's continuous improvement going on, because without continuous improvement, then we are going to get stagnant, and worst case, we're going to go backwards and it's going to fall apart. Gee, we had everybody's attention and we started doing it for a while, everything was working great, and then not so much. We need to make sure that at every S&OP meeting, at every different level, including the executive S&OP meeting at the top, that we always consider what did we do, what can we do better, and so that we can look down, find those root causes, and get through continuous improvement and make it better. We want the ideas to come from the participants. Those are where the most realistic ideas come from. S&OP helps us by monitoring and feeding back the results of making changes in the way we do things. As our ideas are heard, every one of us goes through this our whole lives, is when we feel people are listening to us and actually making changes based on what we said because of what we've seen and experienced, then we feel better about the process, and we know that even though we see things that we're not real happy with, they can change as we go forward. So we want to encourage our employees to take ownership, reinforce working together as teams so they're fully motivated and constantly trying to figure out what's the better way, never being satisfied that this is the only way. That pulls us into the benefits of S&OP. We have operational plans that balance and are consistent with supporting the business plan. We have a continual update to production, financial, and sales plan. When we look at that basic S&OP grid, we see sales. From that, we can easily say, well, gee, if we sell that many units this month, we can put a dollar value on that, and then we can see how long it takes to get paid for that shipment, and we can start to build a cash flow statement. We have our income statement, knowing the month it was going to be sold, and then we have cash flow coming in a month or two later when we get paid. We can look at the other side and look at the production plan and say, gee, if I'm going to produce that much in November, well, I must be purchasing the materials I need in October, so there's the cash outgo. And then depending on when we pay our bills, we can put that into a cash flow basis. In the month we're making it, we know we have to spend money to pay people, keep the lights running, everything else that goes with it. So again, we can see the cash outflow. So we get a continual update on production, finance, and sales all along the way. We have cross-functional planning. Departments across the board are talking to each other. There are no surprises. We have regular meetings, so we know when it's coming up. We have that calendar that we talked about. We do want to raise conflict at these meetings in a good way, but we always want to be able to talk about, gee, that's not the approach we should take. Here's another one. Here's a conflict between what the sales plan is and what production can do. How can we make those things come together? We check our availability of resources. This is where I mentioned maintenance can be at those S&OP meetings. They've been dying to take apart one of those departments, take everything out, rearrange it, paint it, put machines closer to each other. This gives them a chance to see when that window can open and for how long, so that they can plan their materials and labor ahead of time to be able to swoop in, get things done. All in all, S&OP is going to increase your teamwork and the collaborative skills that are out there. That pretty much covers the very, very basics of S&OP. As you heard Tawana say at the beginning, we have our international coming up in October in New Orleans. We also actually have a mini international conference coming in November in Dubai, in case any of you are interested, which will cover many of the same subjects. And then from an S&OP point of view, we have the S&OP certificate that started this year. We have a 7-hour, one-day workshop that gets you the core content, and then you need another 5 hours so that you can get your certificate, and this particular webinar counts as one of those hours. They don't have to be done in any particular order. So congratulations by at least being here and listening. You can get a point toward your APICS S&OP certificate, one of the most valuable certificates you can get in the S&OP world because it's backed by APICS, which is the leading organization in supply chain and operations management. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to me and ask Tawana if there are any questions that have been popping up as I've been talking.
Tony. And just a reminder to everyone, please use the questions tool located within the GoToMeetings webinar to submit your questions to Tony. We do have a couple questions. The first is, it says that S&OP is tactical, but it is also called strategic. Which is it?
That's a really good question. And S&OP is right there in between, trying to connect those two. If we were looking at purely strategic, we would just be looking at a business plan and a strategy going forth in the long term without a lot of detail behind it. If we were just looking at tactical, we'd be trying to figure out what products do I run when, how do I ship them, where do I warehouse them. So S&OP is the link between the two that says, let's take that strategy, take a step back, and figure out what are the general areas that we need to take care of so that we can hand the tactical side of the business something that they can deal with. So it's kind of a strange answer to your question, but it really is kind of both at the same time, and it's trying to connect the two. It's a linkage.
So Tony, does S&OP always have to be done at the family level?
Always. That's a good word. Anybody who's taken any APICS exam knows that when you see the word always or never or only, stay away. This process that we've been talking about gets laid out, and it says this is what's been successful, this is what works for many companies, but every company has to really sit down and look hard at what works for them. So there will be times, and if you have the right people, the right systems, when you might do it and skip the family level because you can. It depends on the volume, the size of the business, what you're dealing with, but I have seen it done successfully in companies. But your biggest chance for success, especially if you're a basic company that has traditional kinds of things in it, is to set up as a family geared towards the marketplace.
Thanks, Tony. Next question. Why is it called SINOP sometimes?
That's the good old SI, the I standing for inventory, sales, inventory, and operations planning. And I kind of alluded that a little bit when I was going over the grids, because I said you really don't plan inventory. Inventory is a calculation. The basic formula is to take your beginning inventory, add production, subtract sales, and that will give you your ending inventory. Now, where the plan comes in is by comparing that to your company policy for, well, how much inventory can we afford? Or how much inventory should we have? We don't want to get too low. So that's when you would look at that number and then go back and say, oops, that doesn't fit our needs long term, which means we have to go back and play with our production number. But you can't just plan inventory and say, okay, this is the inventory number to be at. We really have to plan production because we have to believe our sales forecast number going forward.
Thank you, Tony. I think we have time for one more question, and it is, how is IBP different than S&OP?
Okay, I think the IBP is Integrated Business Planning, and S&OP you'll often hear now called Executive Sales and Operation, ES&OP planning. Basically, at least from my experience, those have been the same thing. It's kind of like just putting a different name on the same process. IBP was a way to help raise the level of S&OP when it wasn't at the point where the top executives were really involved. So rather than come up with a new term, IBP, what I think works best, and you will find it in the APICS dictionary, is executive sales and operations planning, because that then integrates your full business plan, all the financials, your cash flow, income statements, balance sheets. That's at the executive level, ties in those departments. So at least in my mind, IBP and executive S&OP are really the same animal.
Thanks, Tony. On behalf of the APICS Providence chapter, we would like to thank our presenter, Tony Zampello. Thank you, Tony.
You're very welcome.
And many thanks to each of you for joining us for this webinar. Please visit the APICS Providence chapter website for information on upcoming events. And thank you so much for your participation. This concludes our broadcast.